By the time you're watching this, Dauntless has been released on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. As such, lots of new players will be looking for tips and guides on how to do well in the game. Now, having said that, most of the guides that you will find online are outdated. The open beta for Dauntless released almost a year ago, and that is when most of the guides that are currently online surfaced, and Dauntless has changed a lot since then, so some of the information that may be present in those guides may not be entirely accurate. And that is why I am making this video, to bring you guys some tips that I think are going to be helpful not only for newcomers, but also for seasoned players. These are, in my opinion, 8 tips that every single Dauntless player should know. So without any further ado, my name is DarkHero, welcome back to my channel where we cover Dauntless content, and let's get right into it. Okay, so the very first tip I have for you guys is to give you a basic understanding of what the different damage types that are present in Dauntless mean. Realizing what those different colored numbers mean and actually putting them to good use will make you a much better slayer. First, let's go over the basic damage, which is indicated by the green numbers, and it's the damage that is dealt directly to a Behemoth's health. Sometimes, however, you will not see a single green number popping up on screen as you deal damage to a Behemoth. Don't worry, this does not mean that you are not dealing damage to the Behemoth's health. Base damage is still being dealt in the background while you are dealing a different type of damage. Parts damage is the damage that is dealt to unbroken parts of a Behemoth and is indicated by the yellow numbers. Part damage only counts towards a damage threshold for breaking a Behemoth part. Once that threshold is reached, that part will break off from a Behemoth as a lootable item, and that part will no longer be able to take part damage. Breaking parts can alter a Behemoth's attacks and behavior, most often when severing the tail. For example, Behemoths that could use tail swipes will no longer be able to use them, but they may gain access to a different move altogether. As such, you should probably assess whether or not it's worth it to break said parts of a Behemoth, but at the end of the day, if you end up breaking them, you will be receiving extra loot. And keep in mind that by breaking Behemoth parts, you may gain items that will contribute towards your hunt pass progression, so you know, that's always nice. All weapons in the game can deal part damage, but slashing weapons, which are the sword, the axe and the chain blades, have a 50% extra part damage bonus when attacking Behemoth tails. Perks that increase or deal part damage include Blade Storm and Sharpened. Stagger Damage is the damage that is dealt to a Behemoth's head or legs and allows slayers to stagger or knock down Behemoths. Stagger damage is indicated by the blue damage numbers, and generally hitting the head of a Behemoth deals higher stagger damage than hitting the Behemoth legs. Stagger damage is primarily dealt by slashing weapons, which are the sword, the axe and the chain blades, and also by the blunt weapons, in this case the hammer, with blunt type weapons dealing a higher base amount of stagger damage. Do keep in mind that there is a minimum damage threshold that must be dealt in order to deal stagger damage, so often a lower damage dealing weapon such as the chain blades will not deal stagger damage when attacking. Perks that increase or deal stagger damage include Knockout King, Pacifier and Weighted Strikes. And finally, wound damage is indicated by the red numbers, and as you deal wound damage to a Behemoth, you will create wounded points on a Behemoth's body where part damage can be dealt. These wounded parts will now take a lot more damage from other weapon types. Slashing weapons will deal 50% more part damage to wounded parts, and blunt weapons will deal 25% more part damage to wounded parts. Piercing weapons, on the other hand, and by piercing weapons I mean the Warpike, have their negative 25% part damage penalty removed once that part is wounded. You will be able to notice that the part has been wounded if you see aether flowing out of that wounded part. Do note that the Warpike is the only weapon that currently has the innate ability to apply and deal wound damage. Now, since we are talking about damage types, I feel like I should also give you some tips for combat. In Dauntless there is this very unique mechanic that allows you to interrupt Behemoths midway through their attacks. That will knock them down to the floor, dealing a bunch of damage, and will also give you a huge window of opportunity for you and your teammates to attack that Behemoth. Most Behemoths have attacks that can be interrupted. When a Behemoth is performing an interruptible attack, you will see these glowing orange lines on top of the Behemoth's head. These attacks are most commonly charges, which is what you see with the Shrike or with the Embermane, for example. When that happens, all you need to do is use one of your attacks that can interrupt a Behemoth and he will fall down to the ground. This is also called in the Dauntless community as booping a Behemoth. All weapons in the game have different booping attacks, so here on screen you'll be seeing some of them that you can use very easily. Do note that some weapons do require you to have the perk Weighted Blades in order to boop a Behemoth. The easiest example that I could give you and that you can probably pull off is to use the heavy attack on the hammer. As you can see, this Behemoth is charging straight at me, and all I need to do is stand in front of him and wait for him to come close to me, and once he is within range, all I need to do is press the heavy attack key and he will be knocked down to the floor. By the way, a big tip when it comes to interrupting Behemoths: if you're doing these hunts in multiplayer and you are fighting a Behemoth that can be very easily interrupted, such as the Embermane, then once you see that the Behemoth is about to do the interruptible attack, stand behind the teammate that has the weapon that can more easily boop a Behemoth. If all 4 players are spread around the area, it's going to be more difficult for the Behemoth to target the user that has the weapon that can easily interrupt the Behemoth. But if all of you group up together and stand behind, say for example a hammer user, then that hammer user is going to have a much easier time interrupting the Behemoth. Despite the silly name, mastering the boops is essential to being a good Dauntless player. Now the next tip is something that you may already have noticed, but I think that many people that have played Monster Hunter before are still taking a long time to get used to. And that is the way that you use your roll. Instead of rolling away from the Behemoth or away from attacks, you should roll into them. This is because rolling in Dauntless offers you a lot of invincibility frames. Monster Hunter, on the other hand, offers very few invincibility frames, so people who have been playing Monster Hunter for a very long time may take a long time to get adjusted to this. Dauntless is a game that is much more about being aggressive and having an all-out playstyle, and as such, you are given these extra invincibility frames that you can use to your advantage to keep on dealing damage to the Behemoth without interrupting your combos. If you have played Dark Souls before, then you know what I'm talking about when I say rolling into the attacks, but if you're not used to doing this, be sure to give it a try, it's going to make a huge difference. Another quick tip is that if you're having trouble in defeating certain Behemoths, try equipping armor pieces that come with the perk Tough. This perk is available on many armor sets that you will be able to craft very early on, and this perk gives you a lot of additional health. As such, this is going to be extremely beneficial for newcomers that are still getting used to the mechanics of the game. And if you are still having trouble defeating a specific Behemoth even after having Tough at level 6, then I encourage you to bring the Bulwark Tonic consumable. This consumable reduces damage taken by 45% for the next 3 hits. It doesn't wear off after a certain duration, and 45% damage reduction is insane. You can carry up to 4 of these if I'm not mistaken, and they are very easy to craft as they only require 2 Sky Blooms and 2 Iron Thistles. If you are above, say, Slayer level 5, you should be able to craft tons of these. This is one of the best damage mitigation tools that you have in the game, so make sure to take advantage of it. And again, this will be especially powerful when combined with the perk Tough. You can get this perk not only by crafting those armor pieces that I mentioned earlier, but also by equipping cells that come with the Tough perk. Speaking of cells, we need to talk about them because I'm sure many of you guys, like I was doing early on Dauntless, are not taking advantage of your cells. Cells are socketable items that you can obtain by defeating Behemoths and completing different hunts, and also by opening cell cores. These cells can be socketed into different armor pieces and come with different perks. They are extremely important when it comes to creating a build, and very early on you're going to get plenty of them, although very basic ones, but they are still going to be very beneficial. And since they are socketable items that are not consumable, you don't have to worry about using them. As a matter of fact, you should equip as many cells as possible. And if you still have some leftover cells, then you should go to the middleman NPC and combine some of your leftover cells to create more powerful ones. The process of combining cells does take a bit of time until it is completed, so make sure you log into the game each day to make sure that it is completed, and once it is, you can combine new cells to get even more powerful ones. And also, as another tip, is extra reasons for you to log into the game each day. Not only do you have the seasonal items to pick up in Ramsgate, which will give you 50 points each day to contribute towards the Hunt Pass, and remember that each of the weekly challenges from the Hunt Pass gives you 150 points, so by logging into the game each day and picking up these items, you are essentially completing 2 1/3 of these extra challenge quests. But you also have access to the daily bonus patrols, which will give you double the rewards for the patrol you complete. And if you have the elite version of the Hunt Pass, you have not 1 but 2 daily bonus patrols to do. And finally, and I know that this may seem like common sense for most of you, but trust me, some people are not doing this in their hunts. Whenever you sight a behemoth on a hunt, be sure to use a flare to let your teammates know where that behemoth is, because otherwise they may be running around the map looking for it. It's common etiquette or common practice to do this at this point. You are expected to do this. That's the entire point of the flare being there, and this is something that they even show in the tutorial, so I really don't get why some people forget to do this. And that concludes the must-know essential tips that every single Dauntless player should know. Again, some of these are more so for beginners, but some of these also apply to experienced players that may not be aware of them. You'd be surprised as to how many people I've played with in heroic hunts, and they still don't know about the damage numbers. With that being said, if you have enjoyed this video, then please leave it a like, as it takes less than a second and it greatly helps me out. Subscribe if you're new to the channel and want to keep up to date with more Dauntless content. And as always, a huge thank you goes out to my patrons for choosing to support me and helping me keep this channel alive. You guys are my heroes, and a special thank you goes out to Guildarts Gaming for becoming a mighty hero. If you would like to support me, then the link to my Patreon is down below in the description. But with that being said, thank you all so much for watching. My name is DarkHero, and happy hunting!